I think there's an order that's already been set in terms of presentations for the plenary. We'll start with the communication towards funders and policymakers, and then the users, and we'll finish with measuring data. So who was going to speak? Was it you, Chris?
You're the next person.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chris Kitson. I'm the Director General of the Canada Aviation and Space Museum. And I guess we were focused on, what was the question? Is it up? It's not up there. No flip charts, no, yeah. You're relying on a memory that's sketchy at best.
Wait, I'll just get the person first.
We were dealing with policy and government, and how do you approach government and I guess other potential funding partners as well. And the first question that we looked at was some of the challenges faced. And understandably, one of the big challenges that we discussed was related to the fact that, 4 different types of organizations, many different iterations of these sorts of organizations, and then different sizes. We had everywhere from one-person operations, or one paid employee operations, through to national organizations in our room as well. So obviously, the resources, the wherewithal, the connection into government varies at all of these different levels. But given that fact, some of the high-level challenges that were raised were, number one was just simply lack of understanding. There's, and again, depending upon the size of your organization, in some of the cases, some of our partners said they never get the political figures into their institutions, and therefore they really have no sense of what your goals and objectives are, what are the services that you provide. Some of them may have had experiences decades ago, but that doesn't mean they understand a library or an archives in the more current formation. They also noted that to that same degree, many of the political leaders, the best way, in fact, to make sure that you had an impact was a face-to-face. So in fact, if you're not getting that face-to-face opportunity, are you really able to convince them of the value of your organization and perhaps find funding for it as well? Another one of the challenges faced was communicating outcomes. What ultimately does an archives, a library, a museum provide that would be relevant to a political figure? And I think Maureen, it was Maureen that noted that sometimes you really should focus on some of the relevant projects that you support, or at least some of the understand what is important to the politicians, such as poverty reduction, for example, and focus on some of the programs or the services that you provide that address that particular issue. There were language barriers, the difference between political speak versus our professional speak, understanding, what is going to convince a politician or another stakeholder that you do have value. Do you understand the language and the lingo? They noted also there was a lack of available funding, so it doesn't really matter what language you're speaking. If they don't have the funds, you're not going to get much. Also the silo mentality at various levels of government. So, if you're going to be searching for funding, it's frustrating to have to try to dig in at every single level, and maybe there's different languages and different goals and objectives at those different levels, and so you're having to change your story at every level, and of course invest all that time and effort. They're not really speaking to each other. And then it was the information asked of GLAM. So do many of us know? So you finally get that face-to-face, you're there, somebody turns to you and says, okay, I need X. Do you have X? Do you have the data? Do you have the story? Do you have your narrative ready? Are you prepared to sell to them in the moment? Because oftentimes that is your one opportunity, right? You get that one chance to really make an impression and hopefully have them walk away and say, yeah, I'm willing to invest in you. So ultimately, actually, we covered a lot of ground. We talked about a lot of specific organizations and their concerns. What we think it comes down to is potentially 3 different levels. The first is the face-to-face. If you really want to sell what you're doing, ultimately it's important that you create that relationship. We had a member of Parliament here this morning. I was at Science and Tech when he was there for the Da Vinci exhibition. I had an opportunity to talk to him. You can see, you know, that visit left an impression with him. He's here this morning. He's left with another impression. The next person that meets with him and has a really good project, you may have a real opportunity on your hands. The next thing is the data, and we're all trying to build that data here today, and we're trying to find the numbers that matter. There were questions about the data and the value of the data and when you're going to use it and how you're going to use it, and all those things are fair and right, but you should have it, and you should be able to use it. You should be able to pull the information you need quickly, depending upon who you're talking to, and deliver that information to support it. And then the final piece that we talked about was also having a narrative. So the bit of the debate between what matters most, data or your story. And again, depending upon your audience, sometimes the data is really not going to necessarily sell them, but your story, about why you matter, what are the outcomes that you're producing, why they should matter to the government at large or the various partners that you're dealing with. That's really, really important and significant. So again, we understand that with all these different levels of organizations, and this was stated quite frankly in the room, if you're an organization of one, you don't have much time or any time, quite frankly, to go around selling, etc. So perhaps one of the real values of everything that's going on here amongst the GLAM organizations, and I know that there's a lot of national and provincial and large organizations that are taking a leadership role in this, but wouldn't it be nice if at the end of all of this there was a toolkit that was available, regardless of whom you are and what level, that you can draw from. You can draw some of that story, you can draw the data that you require. You're still going to be responsible for the face-to-face. But I think that ultimately that's kind of where we landed on at the end of the day. Because the playing field, this was the final note that was written for me, because the playing field between GLAMs is not level, the quantitative study can help to bridge the gap between the have and the have-not institutions. So I don't know if anybody else from the room, did I miss anything key? No? Those are the results of our meeting. Thank you.
So I'm Francesco Manganiello. I'm the Director of Stakeholder Relations International Affairs at Library and Archives Canada, officially the longest title probably in the room. We had a really spirited and a good discussion on well-being. I'm hoping the slides will be perfect. So much so that I don't think we answered all the questions. So I'll report back on what we talked about. And I think there were about 5 key takeaways. As Chris mentioned, right, I think people realize the importance of telling a story for the GLAM sector, but there's always that tension between telling a story, a united story that represents all the GLAMs while not glossing over the differentiations in terms of mandate or objectives. So what was apparent in our group session, a public library versus an academic library or institution may have different mandates or objectives. With that being said, there was one person in the room, if I remember correctly, she worked at an archives in an academic institution. When we were talking about well-being, let me back up. I think the main message at the beginning was that these are primary findings. We have such a unique opportunity to input at this stage in the game. So I think that was maybe a bit lost writ large. Not in our group necessarily, but I think that message wasn't conveyed strong enough, so I just did it. So now fast forward. So realize the differences between institutions within the GLAMs from a mandate perspective, who they're serving, objectives. So when we're trying to identify or define what is well-being, how do we measure that? It was very obvious that an academic library may not consider well-being in their performance indicators or their messaging. However, that one person, I think from the government, I forget, not government, sorry, academic archive institutions, didn't realize, she never thought about well-being as an indicator because she realized that in her experiences, some of the users, they're re-engaging with the academic community because they're retired, they finally have the means to actually get an education at that level, or 3, say a partner has passed away, so they're basically trying to re-engage with the community they may have already known and let go for a bunch of years. So from that perspective, she really shared a really interesting story about how well-being could be a message. And she even came up with a couple slogans, which I thought were excellent. It was called, "Come to the archives, it's healthy." The second one, which was really good too, "Come for the records, stay for the health." Excellent. So the second message, obviously there needs to be better attention in terms of demographics. Very obvious, the urban versus rural, especially in a country like Canada, needs to be reflected. That also looks at, when we're talking about volunteering, right? In some provinces, such as Quebec, which was shared quite bluntly, volunteering levels are, I didn't know this, but were quite lower in Quebec than, say, in comparison to other provinces. So catching that disparity and maybe trying to identify not why that happens, but in terms of the impact of, say, having low levels of volunteering, say, in Quebec versus another province could add more flavor to the survey. But it was also interesting in terms of it is a privilege to volunteer. You need to be at a certain affluent level. You need to not have commitments that take you away from volunteering. So to capture that as well would be helpful. And that dovetails nicely in the third kind of overall outcome is that you can look at this from a philosophical perspective, from a practical operational perspective is what's the purpose and the level of engagement of your institution? And the discrepancy, sorry, not the discrepancy, but sort of the tension was between community and service. So the same person from her experience in, I don't know if it was Montreal, but in Quebec, saying that people don't view the library as a sense of as a place of community. They see it as they're getting a service. So it's like when I shop for clothes, I don't need to talk to anyone. I just go in, get my shirt, I'm out. So she was saying the same thing in a certain perspective that in Quebec, a lot of people see the library as they're getting a service. It's not better or worse than a sense of community, but just reflecting those realities or differences across the country, across sectors would be helpful. The fourth main message was a fellow from the Central Library of Markham. I'm going to quote him because he was fantastic. He said, do more with more. He didn't understand in his example, for example, why the Central Library of Markham is not engaging with the Art Gallery of Ontario, the Royal Ontario Museum, whether it's sharing expertise, sharing collections. So the anecdote was, we think, okay, because if you're a smaller institution, you might be more nimble. If you're a bigger institution, you may have more resources, more capacity to engage. According to that fellow from Markham, that's not the case. So we're totally, in this glam sector narrative and in action, we are not leveraging our opportunities. So there's still a chance to do more with more. The last main message was really talking about this communication. How do we tell our story? And it was an interesting discussion about, that goes back to that sense of community versus service. So do you have a media campaign that talks about, hey, come to the library, great sense of community for X? Not necessarily, but how do you show it without saying it? And that's an art in and of itself, not just in terms of how you share this outside, but also how do you tell it within your colleagues. So I think recognizing when we talk about messaging or marketing or how do we tell our story, it's not, you don't want to beat a dead horse, because I'll use the example, I have young kids. We take our kids to the library, the public library for story time. If someone promoted that to me, I don't know if I'd resonate with it, like come to the library. Well, maybe if they said come to the library to leave your kids for 2 hours, I'd be very happy to do that. But their messaging didn't have to be so blunt. But the after effects are incredible. I definitely, my wife and I have met friends in the community. We've been in the same city for about 25 years, met some community. So if you think about the messaging, it doesn't always have to be so blunt and heavy in terms of what you're trying to propose to your current users, forgotten users, or new users. And I think that is it, unless someone in our group has anything to add that I may have glossed over. I may have talked too quickly too, apologies. We're good? Okay, merci.
Well, I was supposed to report back on our discussions, but I figured I would bring some help with me, with Andrew. So we had also very good discussions that led to some of the things that you had mentioned, the uniqueness of some of the GLAM sector being archives. Your public is different. You may be dealing with scholars and researchers, and your resources that you're providing are unique. We had some discussions also in terms of what kind of methodology or data that we want.
So on that note, very, very happy with some of the responses. Please, 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 if you have data that you think are important about different GLAMs, if you think you're not being represented, if you think there's issues that are not getting out there, well, give my email, Alice's email, contact us, let us know, because we're keen. This is exactly the sort of debate we want to encourage and stir up on that note. These broader social issues were an important part of some of the feedback we've got. What about literacy? What about IP? What about other issues that GLAMs may encourage? Bearing in mind that we have to cover a broad range of GLAMs here. As the name suggests, we've got to cover libraries, archives, galleries, museums, so we have to encompass them all in this study. acknowledging that there will be specific issues with each of these institutions. Pascal?
Yes, we also noticed that while there are some data that are being gathered, that have been gathered for a while, but we don't necessarily ask why. Like we ask the number of people who will ask for those resources, but we don't necessarily, why do you ask for them? And we've also noticed that there is a shift in terms of the way that people are using the resources. Before, you may have some people who would be using the resources, would come, go, and wouldn't be long. And now, especially in the universities, they notice that people stay longer. So what does it mean? Why? What do you make of it?
Yeah, so on that note, some of this is outside the context of the study in the sense that we had a lot of questions about longitudinal issues, changing behaviour and so on. We're doing a cross-sectional study. Still, it's important to know, is the online world affecting people's use of GLAMs? If so, how? What kind of data do you have on that? What kind of future projects can you suggest? So all of these ideas which might be stirred up are important to us.
There was a tension, I think, and there's always, and as Andrew mentioned, it's kind of thought-provoking, and we're happy that it happened, in the sense that what do you do with an economic study versus an impact study, social impact study? And I think people are sometimes worried that it's all about numbers, but it has to be also about impact. Someone went to the municipality meeting of Quebec and was saying, okay, well, it's one thing to say that you've got X and X economic outputs, but what about how do you better the prospect of employment and scholarship and also scholarity? So there is a tension between those two, and it's how you merge that and also the methodology you're going to use and maybe the next step also of another study.
Yeah, that's exactly right. As I always say, economics is the beginning, but it's certainly not the end. It's not going to explain everything. It's a very powerful tool, but it has its limits. And it's exactly kind of, if you like, supplementary information we want. Well, okay, that's great, but here's where it stops, and here's some of the broader issues that are important to bring to policymakers as well. So yeah, both are important, but we also have to remember the scope of the particular study we're doing.
I think on my end, I think that's pretty much. Well, we made some discussion. We had some discussions on methodology and what is being used, let's say, for health promotion, and how we can look at the betterment and the well-being of the users using the GLAM sector. And we were looking at one thing that came up often is the risk of always wanting to attribute specific results to the GLAMs. Yeah,
you've got to be careful there. You could certainly note it, but being an economist, I know how my colleagues would pounce on things like this. So from one hand, there's strong interest in GLAMs in showing, look, this is more than heaven and earth. You're talking about there's something broader here. There's health, there's well-being, and so on. And it's important to note that. But it's important to do so responsibly and carefully because we want to have a cogent and responsible study at the same time.
So that's it for me.
I think that's it, yes. Wow. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Un énorme merci à l'équipe.
A huge thank you to the Oxford team, and thank you to Chris and Francesco also for taking part in this discussion. And thank you also. We will post on the GLAM Summit page the email address of Mr. Tesler. And what we would like, and it's the reason why we had this session today, is to receive also your contribution. So as soon as we will have posted the email address, please contact Oxford to see what kinds of data you could provide to complete their study. This was a meeting to talk about the preliminary phases of that study. And something else I wanted to tell you, you still have the hashtag of GLAM Summit, and when we were talking about telling one's story, some questions are being asked of you by Twitter, and you can provide us with more meat, so to say, or more information to improve the story we intend to tell. And the idea is to get a common narrative that would be included into the report about this summit. So by the end of this month, or in the next few weeks. So let's move to the next panel. This last panel will focus on the projects realized in collaboration with corporations from the technological world and the philosophy that supports this kind of collaboration. Our panelists will make a short presentation followed by a discussion and a question period of about 10 minutes. Without any further ado,
Creator of our last panel, Eric Chan, known as Ipmon. Mr. Chan is a digital artist and creative studio. Ipmon's client collaboration include Canada Goose, Microsoft, Xbox, Marvel Entertainment, Mini, and the Canada Science and Technology Museum. His creations have been featured internationally from Hypebeast, Complex, GQ France, Jay-Z's, to name a few. J'inviterai tous les membres aussi du panel à monter et à venir s'installer. Merci.
Invite the members of the panel to please come on the stage.
Okay. Bonjour à tous.
Good afternoon, all. My name is Eric Chan. I'm the founder and the digital artist for Ipmon. I'm also a member of the board of the Canadian Association of Museums. My creations are involved in service sector like the museums and even haute couture. So my French is not perfect, so I'll be speaking English.
Welcome to the third and final panel of the technology. And I'm going to go straight ahead. We have a fantastic panelists at the bleeding edge of their sectors. And what I'm very excited about is that each and every one of them come from a very diverse range of industries. So without ado, we shall start with our first presenter. And if we get one of our, yes, our YAC members to come here to start off with our first presentation.
Which is Matthew.
Matthew.
Hi everyone. I'll do this portion of a presentation in French, so if you need headset, please put them on. Mon nom est Mathieu Ferland.
My name is Mathieu Ferland from Ubisoft Montreal. So I started in video games about 22 years ago, early when the studio was created. I remember calling my mother to tell her that this was not a very serious job. I promised her I would find a different job, but like 22 years later, here I am with our 3,500 employees in the Myland. Ubisoft is involved in the neighborhood and at the Quebec level for the arts. And in the community, we have our own art gallery at Ubisoft to highlight the artists of the Myland neighborhood. We're also collaborating more and more with the museum industry. To give just a few examples, so we've been working with the FI Center, Fee Center, and we are borrowing, lending experiences of virtual reality for their visitors. A couple of years ago, we collaborated with the Museum of Fine Arts through our education program to provide her with an app for the student groups that are visiting them. And more recently, last year, we collaborated also with the Pointe-à-Calière Museum for their exhibition of the Queens of Egypt with content of quality. And to talk about these various collaborations, I would like first to talk about Assassin's Creed, which is one of our major brands for video games where the character has the capacity to relive the memories of his ancestors inscribed in his own DNA, so he can travel. Starts with the Crusades. We spent a few years precisely in the Renaissance period. And of course, we are working with large teams. Those are large budgets where fiction crosses reality. We have a battery of historians and archaeologists with whom we're working to rebuild those worlds. Here for Renaissance, of course, we copied Florence and Venice, as you can see, and we met even Leonardo, who lent to us his flying machine and other gadgets that allowed us to grow in this adventure. We also reproduced in another episode the ancient Egypt and where we were able to live at the time of the pharaohs. This brought us also to innovate and create a new type of game that was free for all of our users, where we eliminated all the fights and all the narrative to really focus on some kind of tourism. So you simply travel around, you learn how people were living at the time. You can even learn to read hieroglyphs. And this leads me to talk about the experience with Pointe-à-Calière. We went back to that same episode to develop giant projections on the wall thanks to the content that we had developed. We also developed a video where the tourist approach led us through the whole process of mummification. So we developed a video, and through the museum experience, you could learn more about that technique. Recently, we went to ancient Greece, and there again, a splendid work of archaeology, working with the best experts. So we're even pushing our luck and develop an expertise about the lost city of Atlantis. So in this case, fiction is growing. But the reason why I'm talking about all of that is that in the context of collaboration, the entertainment industry is using huge means for great productions, and why not find a way to reuse those elements? I'm bringing this picture because we heard about it in the news recently. In 2014, we developed a game on the French Revolution that brought us in Paris. So we reconstituted Paris, and more particularly in Notre Dame Church, as it was in the 18th century, not today's, with the level of precision and the anachronisms that we allowed ourselves. That's a video game, so you don't want to replicate each single brick, but we added the element that did not exist at the time, the steeple that did not exist because we found it interesting for our character to climb along it. So there are windows that were not exact because we didn't have the copyright to reproduce them. But once we are documenting, I simply launch a short video just as I'm talking, so there will be an advertisement, so it's on YouTube. Sorry for that. But so there we are. So I found this on YouTube following the fire. So one of our fans played with Assassin's Creed and posted a video that he created and to make us visit Notre Dame Church completely. So going even to places that we were not even allowed to visit. And so we can go in this way onto the roofs and the steeples. And we were able to revisit Notre Dame as it was before the fire and even in the 18th century. The reason why I'm showing that is because I'm wondering if this kind of experience, even with its limits, be considered as a type of archives in terms of experience, just as no one of us went aboard the Titanic, but we all have an idea of how things happened thanks to a film that was presented to us. So I stop here on those beautiful pictures, but we'll come back to that later.
Yeah, just close it.
Bonjour. Donc je vais commencer.
Good afternoon. Let me start in French, and as a true Montrealer, I'll switch to Franglish later on. So my name is Chloé Saint-Cyr. I'm from Maron Factory. I'm a multimedia director in the Department of narrative and educational experiences. I started with a moment about 6 years ago to design immersive milieux, so I'm passionate about museums. I'm delighted to be here today. Now, for those who don't know Maron Factory, some of you may know us because of the lighting of Jacques Cartier Bridge. We have a sound and light show at the Notre Dame Basilica here in Montreal. And we also collaborated with Madonna, and you may ask why would a studio specialized in the ephemeral would like to create bridges with the world of archives, museums, and patrimonial sites, and vice versa. Why would they be interested to cooperate with us? Well, precisely for this reason, several museums and several people from the world of glam come to us so that we help them develop exciting and engaging experiences through multimedia immersive environments, which is fine for us because in our working unit at the office, we want to apply all the tricks, all the magics that we've learned in entertainment to apply it to education and to the museum world in order to create experiences that would have an educational and therefore social value.
I believe that creating experiences can be a key in creating meaningful social experiences. And therefore, in our narrative unit at Maron Factory, our motivation is really to apply all the tricks, magic from the entertainment world to the world take all the tricks and magic we know from the world of technologies and multimedia, but apply it for educational purposes. And so why am I here? Because to do that, we need to cross a lot of bridge with these clients that we work with. And when Catherine and also Eric contacted us, they mentioned the term co-creation. So how do we kind of collaborate with these different clients? And I thought it was very interesting because we also have to collaborate within our own institution because we work with so many different people from more than 19 nationalities, from different backgrounds, from engineering to 3D modeling and all of that. So we also have to every day kind of create a common language and a common process, and as well as a bridge between the industries. Our key challenge has always been to establishing a common language and establishing process, so being very clear about our process. And that's a bit, I think, what I would love to discuss with this great panel today. So why multimedia and what is interest for glam? For sure, it can create very engaging experiences. It can increase immersiveness. We often talk about the digital reset. So when you're in the physical world, you have to place things back once a user has, came and disturbed that, and then the digital reset enables you to do that without any physical things or people, and exploring the impossible, so we can really go in places that we could normally not go through multimedia, through content and all of that. So that has been a common goal for a lot of people, but what makes it different than an experience you would have on your screen, at home in front of your TV or even on your iPhone in the bus, is what motivates us as Maron Factory is our vision, which is we do it in public. So how do we use the technology to bring people together in a certain physical space? Because as we all know, the screen can be very limited as an experience, and it's also reproducible in other places. So why would people get out of their houses to come to a museum? Whereas, recent knowledge and user experience and or multimedia enables us to really connect with the users next to us. So that's our goal. But how do we do that? Managing risk, for example, or how do we even start doing that? Our creative process always starts with prototyping. So I just brought a little example of some projects that we prototype. So we had some session with kids recently, and although we are young at heart, we are quite far away from the experiencing the world as a child. So we try not to think that we know and always try things, and we learn a lot from these processes. Or my colleague here that is trying an interactive device with his dog, so to see, if he could manage multiple things at the same time, for example. So that's a little peek on our process. And finally, the other aspect of us collaborating with GLAMS, I could say, is collaborating is communicating, and establishing common language always is a bit complicated because content for us is not content, the same type of content for some people. Operation is not the same, doesn't mean the same thing. A scenario as well can vary very much in definitions. So that's why I'm hoping to discuss with everybody. Voilà.
Bonjour.
Good afternoon. My name is Claire Payon, and I'm representing the Arts and Technology Society, which you probably know if you're from Montreal and even elsewhere, which has 4 missions. We are an artist center, a research center, a formation center, and we have plenty of disseminating spaces like the dome that you're seeing on the picture, which is suggesting an immersive experience. So SAT is known for its disseminating, less so for our work internally. We have a research and valorization departments. The researchers, developers are creating computer programs which at a certain level of maturity are brought back to my department of value adding or valorization, where they are being applied with different partners to develop projects with a social outreach. So we're always saying that we're percolating the digital arts in society. It's the fact that it comes from the bottom, it boils and goes up. So SAT is Living Lab certified, so we're part of the ENOL network since 2010, meaning that we're working openly and in collaboration. We're exploring the technological uses of with different stakeholders, and we're never developing projects only by ourselves. The idea is really to see how the environment will be tempted to use our technology and develop a partnership with us. SAT is offering a technology, the partner will provide a context, and the third link that's essential, it's the users. So we are engaging the users early on in the process so that we have different outlooks on the projects we have, and this is the way to maximize the outcome, the success of the projects, because we deal with it from different angles. Our second strategy is to work a great deal about experimentation, and this corresponds to what Chloe just presented. We are also strongly into prototyping, and this also very on in the project. So we have an iteration loop. This is an opportunity that's being explored in a creative workshops. So the partners, the users, and the development team, this allows us to prepare recommendations. So we develop, we prototype, and we call all of our team, and we test together. And this may start like 3 months after the beginning of a project. So it could be very simple test with cardboard and paper, but this then will be refined over time. All of this may be abstract, just to give an example. So we developed a project that's called Bibliolab that was developed with the libraries of the City of Montreal and the BANQ for the second year of the project. The idea being that we wanted to use our technology of telepresence. It's how to connect people at a distance. So we're sending audio and visual fluxes. So we all know the video conferencing apps. Our tool allows us to go much farther because we can create collective experiences. I'll show pictures in a moment. So the technology was about the scenic technology, and our team was made up of library staff at all levels, from the management of the library, and librarians and animators and citizens, young people. We try and invite as many stakeholders as possible to explore the project. So here's what it can give when you're working together like that. So the iterative nature permits to refine the projects. For the video lab, we wanted to know how telepresence could be of interest for the library. So we had several iterations in the beginning, but we simply asked the question, does it have any value? And if so, what are we going to do with it? So we first tested different scenario. We were not even using our technology. We were in two different rooms and we were connected through wires, whereas our technology is working at very long distance through the web. But before developing anything, we want to make sure that what we have in mind is interesting. So we tried all kinds of things. So knitting courses, storytelling, even lectures to try and understand what kind of users, what size for the groups, what the constraints would be, and in this way we defined a sort of program that would hold. And so the pictures that I show here are the last tests that we were able to do in libraries in October last, where you see that we have a device that is that allows us to post a group that's at a distance to the group that is gathered in the room, and we have like an hour of storytelling with storytellers in two different libraries. So with the specific expertise of someone who can tell a tale in Chinese in one library, well, there are communities across the territory, but not necessarily that resource everywhere. So then you could share the resources and expertise.
On a fait des formations distribuées. Donc là, la formation, c'était DJ, VJ. Donc il y avait un formateur de chaque côté. Puis les jeunes ont pu créer en fait une expérience audiovisuelle ensemble, parce qu'ils avaient eu les deux formations et ils ont pu jouer ensemble. Ça, c'est dans le mode relativement formel, mais on peut aussi faire des choses plus participatives. Dans ce cas-là, on propose au public de se mettre face à face. On a fait un atelier de transmission de violon à l'oreille. Je ne savais pas, moi, que c'était comme ça qu'on enseignait le violon vraiment traditionnel. Donc, quelqu'un peut montrer un morceau et ça se répète, malgré la distance, on est...
It repeats itself. So, and the last example is a collaborative game that we had. The idea is that this is not a competitive game. The objective is to meet. That's it. So this gives you the different kind of ideas of the things that we've been able to do.
Bonjour, je suis Mélanie Deveau, je suis chef de l'action éducative.
I'm at the McCord Museum, and I am in charge of the education aspects. And I'm not like the rest of my colleagues on this panel. When it comes to the museum, the result is not necessarily digital. It is maybe the means, but it's not the result. And so when we were discussing this panel today, we realized that there was a lot, we had a lot in common. We share a lot. The museum, I'm not really here to talk about an actual technological project, but just to throw out some thoughts and ways perhaps in which we can collaborate and work together. Just a few words about the McCord Museum. So what is it? Well, it is a museum of social history. It has 1.5 million artifacts in 6 collections. So there's paintings and drawings, costumes, Aboriginal culture, photographic photos, and text archives. And so this was a fusion. 2013, it was the Stuart Museum, and there was also the Fashion Museum, and so the collection grew with this fusion. It's a museum that's very interested in Montreal and the issues that are at the center of the Montreal community. And it was also a museum that's a pioneer in certain approaches when it comes to online work, so an online reach out to the public. And its mission, its strategy, all of that is also reflected in its website and in its online projects. So we have undertaken over the last few years a real study to find out exactly where we position ourselves and how we're going to redefine ourselves in the 21st century and what our mission is and so on. And that's why I want to talk to you about our new perspective. So we have reviewed our educational mission, and we want to be, of course, participative, and we want to be at the heart of the citizens' issues. So these are words that we've heard from other members of this panel. What this means is that the various objects that we have in our museum and the exhibits that we have, they have to be, whether they're human, material, or digital, the experience has to be such that it creates a reflection on themes that are appropriate and participative and focused on the citizen. And so our focus has changed. We are looking at the issues rather than the objects or the actual material archives and so on. So we're looking at social issues, and essentially we want to get various stories to emerge, and we want to be a source of reflection. Now, if you do a metaphor with the digital world, essentially we're looking at something that's not very different as Rhizome or the internet. In other words, knowledge is built through different networks with our community, and you build it in a participative manner with all the experiences that you have there. In other words, with collaboration and partnerships, and also with the participation of the people who come to the museum. So we have to be open. And why do we undertake our actions? The result is not necessarily any kind of technological development of a product, but it's really a question of engagement. And really what I want is that the visitor can reflect and can engage to transform the world. And that's essentially what we're trying to do. We want to change the world. That's what it's all about. So the visitor has to be open to himself as well, and has to meet a world that's open to him and to her. So the collaboration with technology, with colleagues who are here, this allows us to support that vision and to create that result. It's a strategy. And this concretely, of course, we need to develop tools together. Many were demonstrated previously, tools that allow us to relate through exhibits and so on, through interactions, through interactive media and so on, and through online work. But when we were discussing with our colleagues, we realized that beyond those tools, there is also a philosophical aspect to digital work. In the processes of work, in the collaboration that it requires, because it is a relationship that we can feel when we work in that kind of world. I was talking to Mathieu a little earlier, and we were talking about the fact that we had a game of escape with one of the sites of the museum, and we were discussing together, and we realized that all of the strategies of that video game can also be used to our way of working and to decompartmentalizing our approach and to our philosophy, because it's a world of experimentation. If you think about Fab Lab, Ivory Maker, everything that you see in the Museum of Science and Museums of Art, well, it's like we're building history. We are literally building history. And so therefore there is a philosophy and a perspective of experimentation that is very important and that's going to inspire us. And that, of course, goes beyond just having mere tools. Now, this we find very interesting because it shows that there are multiple possibilities, and this is what you see here. And one of the issues, and I'm sure that many who are in the institutions of memory can tell us that we need a strategy and a mission that's going to guide us. Otherwise, of course, we have no direction. So we need a thrust and direction, and we're going to be discussing that with our colleagues here now.
I'd like to thank, first of all, everyone for staying. You guys are real troopers until past 5, so I appreciate that. We all appreciate that. I understand that it was a bit too late. We understand, but just a couple more, a little longer here. That being said, this is fantastic. As you can see, these panelists are all in their own different silos of industry, yet the underlying theme is really about engaging technology collaboratively in new and innovative ways and reaching out to audiences. So I'm going to start off with the question, because I think we want to talk about process and prototyping. We all have our own ways of doing it. We are tied to pretty much industry. Even for me as an artist, collaborating in the fashion industry like Canada Goose, there is a systematic process that we have to go through in order to have a conceptual design, prototyping, lots of prototyping, artwork design, and product to marketing distribution. Now the GLAMS world, from my observation, I'm no glam genius, but I think that there is the process is different. And we all talk about collaborations, we talk about co-creation, but how do you do it? What makes it, what makes it happen? How do people come together? So my question to my panelists here is on that topic about co-creation. Where do you find that like the benefits of collaboration and you experiences, can it be in the world of GLAMS as well? Because GLAMS, it's an institution, it's a nationwide endeavor, but it's more to just like creating an outcome for people to experience. I think there's a lot more in-depth in regards to GLAMS. And I would love to hear your thoughts on that. I could start with, Mathieu.
Is it working? Yes. Okay. I think it starts with a good mixity of expertise. You know, if you're going through your brainstorm and you're envisioning your new, project, it's good to consult people from other, other expertise, either from technology companies like ours, or just to get another feeling about what you're doing. And having different people around the table, you will mix some ideas, and you may end up with a proposition that is a bit different than what you expected, and maybe as accessible technologically speaking. As you said earlier, we spoke 5 minutes about game design and we came up with a few ideas already, So it's good to mix perspective as soon as you're envisioning your projects.
Excellent. Care to share your thoughts, Chloe?
Sure.
Yeah.
So through collaborating with institutions, I think one key factor is to start with understanding that we're complementary, and once that's set, then good conversations happen, because you guys are the experts of your public, and your museums know their public best, and they know their content best. And we would, if we came in the room saying like, oh, we know what you could do with your content, then that would start off on a bad foot. But when that that first is established, and then we find common goals, which is maybe going away from traditional exhibition, or creating a more engaging experience with technologies, for example, then we can start having a good conversation.
Yeah, I think a lot of the things that I've been hearing is about building and fostering relationships. At the end of the day, it's like, I can do this, but so what? That's great, but can we cohesively, synergetically, if that's even a word, to come together? And what Chris Kitsan was mentioning about the face-to-face value, putting a face to things, to even down to the body language, makes a big impact in actually getting collaborations off the foot. But yes, egos out the door. I don't care if you're a big museum or a small museum. That's for that matter. People have to work together, and if you want to talk about innovation, you have to embrace the entire spectrum. At least that's my thought. Anyway, sorry, my bad. I'm going off here. Yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts, Claire.
Je pense que
I think the subject matter was how can we how can we make our clients live new experiences? I think that many of them don't want to move as much, but we want to renew our clientele, and therefore recourse to technology is very important today. But no one seems to have the real solution. Those who are developing the technology, or the owners, or responsible people in the libraries, in the museums and so on, galleries, don't seem to have an answer. So we want to perhaps involve also the customers, our clients, to see what the public at large wants to experience, what will motivate them to move and to come and to get, involved in any of the activities that we plan. And that collaboration is also important.
j'abonde dans le sens que
I quite agree with what all my colleagues have said here, and I think one good way of creating collaboration is to be transparent, to be clear about what each and everyone's objective is, because some of these experimentation and adventure can actually be very expensive. Are we clear? Are we transparent? We may not have the same goals in mind, but each of us can develop perhaps a project together, nevertheless. And I think that when you're transparent, upstream, what is in it for you, what's in it for me, in what we're trying to undertake.
That industries and institutions, private, public, should be coming together more and more so. I like to make the analogy, do you want to be the Blockbuster Video, or are we going to be the Netflix? Because especially nowadays in the digital age we are in, I think that exponentially it's going to keep on going, and we have to do something. And I think through co-creation, through collaboration is the way to do it. Break down the barriers. Let's work together. That being said, though, I think another big point that we all were addressing is risk, mitigating risk. As we know, like in the private industry, there's a lot of risk. We take risks. We fail hard. Sometimes it hurts really bad. It really hurts. And I'm sure that everyone has their own take of that, and we could probably have another panel about failures altogether. That being said, understandably, the institution, the GLAMS world of failure is very, I like the still thing. Again, I'm coming from an outside view, but it's still quite risk adverse. The feds, the government, risk adverse. But I think, failure is where the opportunity lies. And I'd love to hear each of you. We'll start with, I guess we'll go through again about failure and what really sucked, but what really benefited the entire organization to move forward and into new endeavors.
That's interesting because we're celebrating failures internally because it's yeah. I mean small failures because it's good to test different things, and when something doesn't work, we've been learning something at least. And in the same mindset, in terms of external collaboration, I'm a big fan of baby steps. So when comes the time to work together, although we may have huge ambition and envision a very interesting big project, let's start by baby steps where and set different procedure where at any moment we can make it separate ways and everybody's happy. So it's a way also to manage the risk, because we'll develop something together, we'll do something together, but we don't know. We know how it starts, but we'll never know how it's going to end. So let's build this baby step.
Would you consider these sort of kind of like the skunk works, behind the scenes sort of thing?
Well,
right?
no, let's do something that is incremental. So first on what you can build upon, And if things are going well and the cooperation progresses, then the table is set to make it successful.
It'd be cool, I mean, even if all the GLAMs could have their little groups to have these incremental prototyping as well, maybe have, if it's possible, but yeah. Oh, yeah, Claire, sorry.
Changing the order.
Oh, sorry, okay.
Oui, ben en fait, ça rejoint exactement ce que...
I agree with you, Mathieu, because we're also working that way. We're not spending a lot of time between the different phases of development. And if, of course, we have a failure, then we can just take a step back. It's not going to be a major deal. And Melanie, you were saying that it's important that we should know our objectives and our goals, because actually one of the risks is that you get lost because you get advice from left and right, and you don't know which way to turn anymore, and you don't know how to keep your trust and direction. And therefore, it's important that you should find out exactly who can assume what role, who's going to make what decision. Things have to be very transparent at that level as well if you want to move forward. And then when you have a problem, you come to a fork in the road, you have to be able to make the right decision. Also very important to document all that so that if you turn back, you'll remember why there was a failure, why things worked.
And I think it's a good example of what could be a start of a failure as well, because when we talk about technology, like it's out there, it's this big thing and stuff, and you have these, I call them technology evangelists. We have them in everywhere around us, and they come and they like push a certain technology. It should be this, it should be that, and I think that's the first like red flag alert when it comes to technology and integrating those in collaborative work, because you really have to go back to what's the goal, what you want to do, and then look for what technology could help doing that. So when we start a project at Maron Factory, we always look at the concept. We don't even think about technology, and then we look at the means that could help us achieve this. So that's one of the first things. But then to get to where we want to achieve, and not to paraphrase what the other panelists said, yes, we work through an iterative process of prototyping, but then through collaboration, that process is quite scary. Normally, when we do it internally, we're used to it. We're used to our, the motto of agile process is fail often, fail fast. So you see these failures, and they're part of a process. And from a design thinking perspective, we're used to it. But when we want to bring our clients in that process, we need to hold their hands and make sure they don't see this as the failure of their project or the means that they invest with us. That could be quite scary. It's huge amounts of money, as you mentioned earlier on. So yeah, I think we want to mitigate risk by prototyping, but one of the risks of prototyping in collaboration is scaring people. Yeah. If I can be so blunt.
We need that.
Je ferai du pouce un peu sur ça. En fait, je pense.
I think we have to be clear about our mission in a museum, and it's very true what you're saying, because prototyping requires that we have a collaborative relationship and not a relationship of client and company. So, right at the outset, we have to change the definitions of the people that we're collaborating with. And finally, on the processes, we've been talking about failures and so on. Yes, I think it's very, very important. And in fact, we had a meeting last year about failures and how important it is to document them, to share them, and so on.
That being said, how much time do we have? Are we done?
5 minutes for questions.
We're okay. So as you can see, we can keep on going. Unfortunately, I think we're a bit out of time, so we are open for questions. But a little bit of a quick wrap up. I think a lot of the things that we've been hearing is, the idea of prototyping, processing. If even GLAMs were to engage in that capacity, doesn't need to be big. It can be as small as you want. But I know at least that is the ingredient to push the innovation envelope we keep on talking about. And I also like the idea of being mindful of what type of technology we use, not just because it's cool, but because it will work in the objective that you need to approach or to do. So yeah, questions?
Oui, bonjour, je suis bibliothécaire, est-ce que je m'entends? Je suis bibliothécaire ici à la Bibliothèque Archives nationale du Québec. Je trouve ça vraiment.
I'm at the National Archives of Quebec, and I find this very interesting. In fact, my spouse is a video game developer, and so we have a lot of discussions about games and creativity and so on, and the difference in the means that we have at hand when we compare the public and the private world. You in the private world, of course, are more profit-minded as well, and I'm wondering how these two worlds can actually meet, because we don't have the means of hiring you, but we need you, and maybe you need us for other reasons. I'm not sure how this collaboration can benefit us both because of the profit-minded private industry. You say that you can't hire a full team to create a video game or something like that. Yes, you're quite right, because it's very expensive. But we have a lot of expertise in Quebec. We have 200 independent developers. We have designers, excellent designers. So it would be interesting to get a second opinion on a project and to be surrounded by people. If you just call out to the people around you, I'm sure you can find a designer who's going to come and sit at your table, even as a volunteer, because the challenge will interest him. And so a programmer can come and give you some of the technical clues. And so automatically that will enrich your project work. May I add something? I think this is very interesting because as consultants, we do a lot of pro bono projects. And I'm surprised about what you're saying. Because when we think about blocks between us, it's problems that we may have when it comes to developing projects, it's really about the technology. People say, well, we'd like to do this, but we can't buy 14 projectors and so on. And we say to those people, many GLAMs have access to technology, but it's the use of that in the non-traditional use. Everything is going to change if you look at that. It's very small changes, and you have the means in your institutions already to make those changes, and then it's a question of reaching out. That's it. Thank you very much. I'm Claudine Relais, and I am responsible for projects in the Shawinigan for the digital development, and we have an expertise in heritage work and museums. And we work with the Museum of Trois-Rivières as well. So this is exactly what we do. We do co-creation, we work with the institutions, and we're very close partners. We sit at the same table with the museum, and we work with the very little amount of money that we have to actually create the prototypes. And the first one is going to be happening in the next few weeks. In fact, the project started a year ago. And I was going to say, we're in, of course, a smaller region than Montreal. We work regionally and not just in the city. But when it comes to engagement, we want to work, of course, with the public who comes to the museum. And co-creation, therefore, has many different steps. And there are 15 different companies with different profiles, and we want to work with the cultural partners and the visitors. So when it comes to engagement, how do you reach out to these, to the public at large? How do you keep them active? How do you feed the whole process? How do you keep it going? Well, there are different perspectives and scales here. Obviously, the partner has different resources, and it's to their interest to make those resources available. When it comes to the clients, of course, you have to make them actually participate as co-creator, so that they can come up with scenarios, ideas. They can draw things on a piece of paper, and then they're going to be able to get motivated that way. And you'll see the kind of feedback they're going to be able to provide. That's also going to enrich our work. So we're working in a circle here, and the engagement, when it is built up, it'll stay there. It'll be there all the time. We're working in a loop here. And for young people, we have all kinds of educational projects, and it keeps them motivated. Once they're there, and once you've reached out to them, they're going to be present from there on. But they have to see the value of what you're doing, so it's up to you to present it in such a way that they understand the value. But we discover very quickly that by asking a few questions, there are huge numbers of people who want to participate, who want things to evolve, who want to be involved. It's not that difficult.
On the museum side, there would be many things to say, but I believe that it's also our responsibility to combine our efforts. The Makah Museum, along with several institutions, is part of a round table. And Nathalie Bondy talked about it this morning. It's a meeting place of different museums to perhaps come up with a common project which could serve all. We don't have a lot of means, but we often find ourselves in similar situations. Instead of each of us creating their own thing, perhaps we could combine our efforts, identify common projects, go through all the beta versions and the pilot versions and so on, which creates a relationship with users or visitors at the museum. So I think we should regroup in the media itself, as we're trying to do now. If I can add something, it might be interesting to develop digital committees, for example. Many of you do it. We were wondering, how can we bring people to our table? Well, a lot of people are interested in the arts. I'm part of the digital committee of the Musée des Beaux-Arts, and I bring my own approach to different projects. If it's done here, why not do it in the Shawinigan region? Certainly. Well, I'm open to all offer of cooperation. So I thank you very much. It's all the time we had. So thank you to our moderator panelists.
Maintenant, j'aimerais inviter.
And now, if you can exit from this side. Now I'd like to invite the CEO of the Bibliothèque des Archives nationales du Québec and then Mr. Berthiaume to conclude. I promise I won't make an epic discourse. We've had a lot today. I've retained one expression we've just heard, which seems to me to summarize what we're trying to do together. One panelist said that we were trying to manufacture something, manufacture history, manufacturing something around our cultural and artistic heritage, archives, libraries, and so on. Without making a speech, I wouldn't be remiss if I forgot to thank the director of the MBA, Ms. Blondy, for the fantastic presentation she made this morning. She had to leave very quickly. She's in the sky as we're talking now. She mentioned 3 or 4 concepts that I'd like to remind you of. We've discussed these concepts all day. Complexity, the need to be together, which is complicated, but which finally can be done. I also liked something she said. It's so true. Her comment on ecosystems, when she said the same exhibition in Paris and in Montreal will not have the same configuration. It's not possible. We have to know where you are, with whom we are, to whom we're speaking, who are the people we're trying to look for. Many fantastic things were said all day. I can't name them all, but I also liked the moment of truth on justice. Someone said, truth before reconciliation. Truth before reconciliation in our thinking is quite important. And I think that everyone has learned a new word. The avatar concerning this experience described this morning of coming to find the good, the concepts, the ideas, and to give them back to those it belongs. In the case of Canada, it means to take things from the south and bring them back to the north. There's a lot of to and fro on the earth today to bring things back to those they initially belonged to. I wouldn't want to conclude without thanking very warmly the Association des Musées du Canada, the Canadian Museum Association, and BAC, who allowed us to meet today. And by thanking BAC, I'd like to thank also Guy Bertium, who's at home when he's here, and when we went to visit him, we felt at home. He'll be leaving. It's not sure yet, but must be here that he'll be leaving in a few weeks or months. I feel like saying that he's offered some remarkable service to our institutions. All of Guy's career was at the service of the users, our counterparts, and he did more than a share of mediation, which allows me to conclude with the following idea. It seems to me that biblioteconomists and technology, what you said in the previous panel, which I'd like to salute, it seems that library people are people of mediation. I see my colleagues do hundreds and hundreds of humble acts. We go toward them, we ask them something, they listen, they put themselves in the other's place, they register what we've asked them. It's really, and we debate it, we discuss it. And library people make these gestures thousands of times so that knowledge and heritage that will be more available to people. So I trust that library workers will play the game you've proposed. So thank you. Have a good trip back for all of those of you who have to go back to your cities in the country. So thank you, Jean-Louis, for these kind words.
Still alive, she would have believed almost everything you said. Mathieu Ferland, again, I won't go over everything that's been said today, but Mathieu Ferland said, at Ubisoft, we celebrate failure. Well, unfortunately, I don't think we can celebrate failure tonight. I think when we're at the cocktail, we can celebrate a great achievement. Je veux terminer.
I'd like to end by thanking the members of the organizing committee of this summit. And right now, I have to surely forget some of you, and I apologize. Danielle Chagnon, who's a retiree. Is she with us now? I see a hand. Okay, good evening, Danielle. Geneviève Rossi, Sarah Deraps, is she still around? Hello. Geneviève Murray, Jacinthe Deschâtelet, I don't believe she's with us. From back, Cynthia Boyko. They're probably all working outside. Catherine Prou, Sarah Grenet, Joanne Charret, and applauding her a bit. Or fantastic organizer, Pascal Robichaud.
Organizing Committee, Maureen Sawa, CEO of the Greater Victoria Public Library, and our beloved IPMON, Eric Chan. Thanks. I also want to thank volunteers. You've probably noticed are significantly younger than maybe us, or at least me. Our LAC Youth Advisory Council, so Camilla Grasick, Eder Townsend, Tyler Owens, Emily Vandal, and Erica Vanden Bosch. Probably all in the hall, and but thank you. Thank you. Bien sûr, tous nos panélistes, modérateurs.
Of course, thank you to all our panelists, moderators, and guest speakers. Thank you for coming. Together, we've made the Canadian GLAM group a stronger and more unified sector.
Last time, my friend Maureen Sawa, and she's not getting, are you getting money every time I quote you or no? Huh? Not even a dime, not, okay. Not under copyright at all. Okay, so anyways, let me leave you by quoting Maureen one last time. Our objective is not to do more with less, but more with more. More collaborations, more partnerships. More with more, the perfect mantra for the GLAM sector. So let's hit that cocktail now. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, merci beaucoup.
So thank you very much, and this concludes our session. Just some last thanks for those who worked in the shadows. Mr. Jean Liréois, President's team, the communications team of BNQ, the boutiques team, the Friends of BNQ, the volunteers, Benoit Bennett, our AV technician, the security team, and also from our side, we had Brigitte Ostra, David Perrault, and David Cameron taking notes to prepare a report on this great summit. I know it was a bit longer than scheduled, but I hope that you still enjoyed it. And the boutique, the store is still open, but let's move on to the cocktail. Good evening, and good trip back.